Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. I wanted to talk some basketball with you guys, and as you guys know, the NBA bubble is in full effect. And after everything that's gone on over the last week with the protests, I just wanted to say I totally respect and understand why the players did what they did, and I respect them using their platform that they have and using the rights they have in order to make a point that they wanted to make. So I applaud the players for that. And if they really want to make a change, they're doing a nice job to start it up. So I respect the players, and let's talk some basketball. The last time we spoke basketball on this show, it was right before Luka Doncic hit the buzzer beater for the Dallas Mavericks to beat the LA Clippers in Game 4 of that series. And a lot has happened, really since that series has taken place. We'll start off with the Toronto Raptors and Milwaukee Bucks both ending their series. We saw Toronto in action yesterday against Boston, and we'll talk a little bit more about how Game 1 of that series went in a little bit. But Boston had no problem with Philadelphia. Joel Embiid, as he played well, but you never really thought Philadelphia had a chance to win this series as good as he played. Philadelphia, shortly after the game, fired their head coach, Brett Brown. So we're going to get into them for a little bit. And then the Clippers, they eliminated the Mavericks yesterday, as did the Lakers. So there have been a bunch of things going on in this NBA bubble. The first thing and the first storyline that really stands out to me is, even though they were eliminated yesterday, the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic are one big player away, I think, this offseason from being a legit finals contender next season. I think if you give them a Tobias Harris-esque player, a player that is on the same level as a guy like him, I think Dallas is a threat next year to be one of the better teams in the NBA. When you watch Luka Doncic, you just could see it, man. He is special. And the way this guy plays, the way his court vision is, the way he shoots, the swag and the confidence that he plays with, the numbers that this guy has been able to put up at such a young age, at only age 21, that's incredible. And he did as much as he could do to possibly get the Dallas Mavericks over the hump against the LA Clippers in this series. And when he hit that buzzer beater on Sunday, man, that was just crazy. As soon as it left his hands, you kind of just knew that it was going to be going in right away. And for him on that kind of stage to beat a team like the Clippers, a team that, let's face it, most people still right now think that either the Clippers or the Lakers, and a couple people think that the Milwaukee Bucks right now are the front runner to be the next NBA champion. And for Luka Doncic to have that kind of moment on the big stage like that was absolutely phenomenal, and props to him. And unfortunately, Porzingis didn't play in the last 3 games of this series. I think if Dallas has him in definitely games 5 or 6, they could have made it a little more competitive. Maybe they would have won another game or two. And the thing is, with Porzingis being hurt, that's what makes Doncic's performance even more impressive in that game. What was it? Game 4 victory for Dallas over the Clippers, because he literally just carried his team on his back and just played an awesome, awesome game. And then you look at his final numbers in that game. My dude had... Look at these numbers, just absolutely ridiculous stat line of, in 46 minutes played, 43 points, 13 assists, and 17 rebounds. Absolutely crazy for Luka Doncic. The Mavs won that game 135-134, and I do think next year they are probably one star player away from really competing for a championship, because when you look at their team, the rest of them, Maxi Kleber, fine player. Dorian Finney-Smith, fine player. Trey Burke played really well during the bubble. Same with Tim Hardaway Jr. But none of these guys, besides maybe Tim Hardaway, have that efficient, consistent role that they're used to playing with every game. I think for Dallas, if you get one more star player next year, could be really, really good. For the Clippers, they end up winning the series, but I don't really know what to think of this team the way they've played over the last couple games, because ever since Doncic hit that shot, they were great. And there aren't many players I trust as much as Kawhi Leonard to make a big shot and get the job done on a big stage. But even though Paul George performed well the last 2 games, he didn't even play great yesterday, to be honest. He had 15 points, 6 of 19. The challenging thing about predicting who is better or who would win in a series in terms of the Lakers or Clippers is this. I think the Clippers have really built their team properly if the mission is beating LeBron James. When you play Kawhi, Marcus Morris Sr., and Paul George all on the floor at the same time, that's a big lineup. You then throw in Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, JaMychal Green, Reggie Jackson, who's played decent in this series. They have Patterson as an option off the bench. There's still plenty of guys on this LA Clipper team that could at least limit LeBron, like a Marcus Morris, like a Kawhi, like a Paul George, even maybe a Montrezl Harrell, who will, do his work on Anthony Davis. And then you look at the rest of them, like, they're not really great players. They're not really that, skilled players. They haven't really played great in this series against Dallas. Zubac has been good. He played 33 minutes yesterday, but the Clippers and Doc Rivers still refuse to play him on the floor in meaningful games. They also, Landry Shamet played 38 minutes yesterday. He was fine. Reggie Jackson, 27 minutes. Lou Will only played 17. So it really is going to depend on matchup personnel for the Clippers, and I think they have the right coach, Doc Rivers, to kind of mesh it and, get people in the right positions and put his team in the best position to win. But that's going to be a challenge. Pat Beverly is also hurt for the LA Clippers. He was hurt in this game, but he's another guy that when they play the Lakers, eventually they could throw on him. But the Clippers, they have a bunch of bodies, and I still think eventually they're going to need to get their chemistry right before they want to, make a legit run at the NBA Finals, but they're on the right track. And what I'll also say about the Clippers is this: they didn't really have that many games during the regular season with all of their top dogs healthy, with the Kawhi healthy, when after Marcus Morris got there, with the Paul George healthy, with the Pat Bev healthy, with a Montrezl Harrell healthy, and for the first time really in since the beginning of the season, all of those guys are back. And the Clippers are, they still have to get their chemistry going, but I think they're in a really good spot to make a deep, deep playoff run. Moving on to the other LA team, the Lakers, really quick. They played well after their Game 1 loss to Portland. I never really thought after the Lakers lost Game 1 that they were ever going to lose to Portland. I think if Portland would have won, maybe one or two more games in the series, I would have taken them a little more seriously. Because as much as I love Dame, first of all, with him hurt, that was a big problem. Once he got hurt, you kind of never really thought Portland had a chance. But Portland had to fight and scratch their way just to make the playoffs. And the fact that they even fought their way to make it in the season where a majority of the players on their team was hurt, that was unfortunate, but good for them for making it. Melo played really well in this game, in Game 5. I think next year he should be in Portland once again. I think he has really found a role there. Gary Trent as well. Him getting 40 minutes of experience in a playoff basketball game for him is huge. And the Lakers will be moving on to the next round. Once again, even though they didn't play great in Game 1, there was never really a realistic shot that I thought they would ever lose. Moving on to the other two Western Conference series. How about Game 7 coming up tomorrow night between Utah and Denver? This has been a crazy series. To start off, the Nuggets won a crazy Game 1. When you look at that game, it was just wild. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell, basically every game in the series have been going off. But listen to this. In Game 1 of that series, Denver wins it 135-125 in overtime. And look at some of these numbers. Jamal Murray had 36 in that game. Jokic had 29. Off the bench, Jeremy Grant had 19, Monte Morris had 14, and then for Utah, Donovan Mitchell had 57, only 4 short of Michael Jordan's playoff record against the Celtics in 87. And really, since that Game 1, it's been back and forth, punch for punch, in each of the remaining games. Utah then came back, won the next 3 games behind Donovan Mitchell. He has been incredible, and he has been one guy in this bubble that has really showed us how good of a player he really is. That's the thing about Donovan Mitchell and, the whole bubble, and one thing I've really realized is I think the bubble has really shown us just how talented the league is. Where would you rank Ja Morant right now in terms of the NBA's best point guards? I'll list you off the top of my head right now point guards that I would take over Morant, or at least would be in the same conversation as Ja Morant. Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, Russell Westbrook, Mike Conley. You got Jamal Murray is another one. All of these guys, Kyle Lowry, Kemba Walker, Kyrie Irving, all of these guys are guys that are really good players. And John Morant, he's going to be one of the next future studs of the league. And he isn't one of the best point guards in the league right now. So, but the reason why the bubble has been so good is because every team had at least like one or two players where you're like, when you watch them, you're like, all right, I'm really excited to watch them play. And Jamal Murray is another one of those guys where if you don't watch him play for the Denver Nuggets night in and night out during the regular season, you may not necessarily have noticed just how good and how, cold-blooded of a player this guy is. This guy just makes tough shot after tough shot, and literally the last two games of this series. So this was Thursday night this was what day was it? So this was Tuesday night for the Nuggets against the Jazz. Facing elimination in game 5, Jamal Murray drops 42. And then last night, somehow, some way, he ups himself and does even better as he drops excuse me. I'll give you the exact amount right now. I'm just pulling up the box score right now. Terrible radio, I know. But yeah, so Jamal Murray yesterday for the Nuggets drops 50 points on 17 of 24 from the field. Efficient shooting. If I'm going to give you guys an official Game 7 pick, I'm going to take Denver. It's just very hard for me to bet against Jamal Murray right now the way he's playing. You have some depth guys back in the mix as well with Gary Harris, Millsap, Grant, Morris is playing well. Plumlee, Michael Porter, Torrey Craig. Gary Harris, getting him back is very, very big news for Denver. So, once again, I think Denver wins Game 7 now that they're healthy. And people forget that Utah... The Jazz right now, when you look at their team, aren't 100% healthy. So I think eventually that was going to catch up to Utah. Unfortunately, the fact that they couldn't put Denver away in games 5 and 6 when they really did have a chance, especially yesterday in the beginning of the game, at least they were up, and then Denver in the second half just took over. I think, look, when you look at Utah, I don't trust many players on their team besides Mitchell and Conley and Gobert. Joe Ingles has really struggled for the Jazz so far in this playoff series. I think the way Denver's playing, they will take Game 7. The other Western Conference series I'll talk about is Oklahoma City and Houston. This was another series like Denver and Utah that has been The Rockets came out in games 1 and 2 and then absolutely dominated the Thunder, especially in game 1. And then game 2 used some momentum to go on a big late run to get the win. So the Rockets were up 2-0. Then Oklahoma City wins game 3 behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and his heroics. And they also win game 4. So then the other night, in Game 5 with Russell Westbrook back, it was tight early. Oklahoma City was very competitive early, but the Rockets ended up getting the victory. They ended up blowing them out, actually, by a final score of 114-80. You look at Game 6 of that series, that's going to be tonight. And I'm going to give you guys another prediction. I think Oklahoma City and the Thunder beat Houston tonight. I don't know what exactly it is. I know Chris Paul in his career, hasn't really been the best guy throughout the playoffs. But at the same time, the way this Oklahoma City Thunder team has responded to adversity so far this season has really impressed me. And when you look at it, Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Gallinari, Steven Adams, and Shai Gilgeous, that's the best 5-man unit in basketball in terms of scoring plus minus. And I think if the Thunder are going to want to win, they're really going to need to use that lineup to their benefit. And with Russell Westbrook back, I don't think it's just this easy. Russell Westbrook has, really been at the shadow of controversy throughout his NBA career. And I'm not saying the Rockets are necessarily a better or worse team with or without him in the lineup. I just think that when you look at the way this Rocket team has played and the way this Thunder team has played so far in this series, I think Oklahoma City lives to survive another day. I think they win tonight over Houston. In the East, I did pick Boston and Milwaukee to win each of the series before they start up. When you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, a lot of people said that going into this Miami Heat series, they could be challenged, and I absolutely do think they will be. I think this is going to be a 7-game series. Game 1 of that series tips off at 6:30 tonight. Look, I think when you look at this series, the Bucks could really play, obviously. The Heat could really play. And I do think when you look at it from a matchup perspective, if anyone was going to beat the Miami Heat in the if anyone was going to beat the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference, I think the Miami Heat could give them a really good challenge, and they could be the number one team that comes to mind in terms of teams that I think could challenge the number one seeded Milwaukee Bucks. I mentioned Bam. You have Jimmy Butler. Miami also has some shooting with Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson and Kendrick Nunn, a guy that finished in as a finalist in the Rookie of the Year voting. He hasn't even played a minute for this Miami Heat team in the bubble. So if they get him going and back into the rotation, I absolutely think Miami can compete with the Milwaukee Bucks. The problem with Milwaukee for me is this that I worry a little bit about. I think if I were to give them a percentage to come out of the Eastern Conference right now, I would say it's 65%. I think all three of their competitors right now, Miami, Boston, and Toronto, at least will give them a competitive run in these playoffs, no matter who they play, whenever it is. I think when you look at Miami in this series, Jay Crowder and Iguodala, like the way they built their team, they could play with Giannis. And if they do frustrate him, this is the worry for me about the Milwaukee Bucks. It's that if Miami at least frustrates Giannis and limits him a little bit. And once again, I think with the personnel, the Miami Heat have the ability to do that. So if that happens, Milwaukee is really going to need for some of their other guys to step up. And I think when you look at it, they can, but they haven't been consistent enough to do it. When you look at Chris Middleton, he's a guy whose game I really like. And in certain regular season games, I've seen him really take the next step. But I want to see him and what he does in the playoffs. When you look at, Brook Lopez and Eric Bledsoe, those are two other guys that throughout their major league NBA careers so far, they've been good players, but haven't really produced in the playoffs yet, and they didn't really do it last year. They have some younger players that I think could make an impact for them, like Dante DiVincenzo. He's a shooter that comes off the bench. He could really play. George Hill, I think, is a guy that has playoff experience that could help them in Milwaukee. So I think when you look at the Bucks, they're going to need, if Miami could frustrate Giannis, they're really going to need some other guys to step up. And if they don't, I think Milwaukee could be eliminated early, but they could also, with their talent and their ability, go right to the NBA Finals. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Miami and Milwaukee has on tap for us tonight. I think the Bucks win in 7. I think maybe Miami could give them a little bit of a run early in the series, but eventually the Bucks and Mike Budenholzer adjust to it. I have the Bucks in 7. Before yesterday's series, I had the Celtics winning in 7, and I'm not going to change that pick, but I was really nervous about it. I wasn't 100% confident. I know that the kind of basketball Van Vliet, Siakam, Lowry, they play, and the championship pedigree they have, along with Nick Nurse and the production Toronto has been able to get this season, I've just been more and more impressed every time I watch them. They were good against Brooklyn, swept them. Boston swept Philadelphia. And one thing I'll say about Boston is this. The top 3 of Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, and Jaylen Brown is just as good as any other top 3 in the league. Like, I'm actually confident in that statement. And obviously they're not on the same level as some other stars, but all I will say is this. If you give me those 3 guys on my team, I'm confident in my matchup against really any other team in the league. And when you throw in guys around them like Marcus Smart, Daniel Tice, they help. Obviously, I do think if Boston wants to go to the NBA Finals, which I think their top-end talent would allow them to, they're just going to need, Gordon Hayward to come back healthy. And he's also expecting the birth of a child soon, so he could be out of the mix for a little bit. I think that could hurt Boston, unless other guys off the bench could produce as well. Brad Wanamaker, Robert Williams both played some minutes yesterday. But when you look at this team right now and the way they're built, Boston, I think they could obviously really play. But at the same time, they could struggle. Jason Tatum did not play well yesterday, and the rest of the team picked up his back. And Pascal Siakam, he picked up 3 fouls in the first half, and I think ultimately that's what ended up killing Toronto in this game. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in this series. I think Toronto will bounce back in Game 2. I fully expect this series to go 7. So it was good to hit on all these series with you guys. We're going to be back talking NBA on Wednesday's show. Real looking forward to it. And always good to talk some bubble basketball on the ZK SP.